Ora si
Introduction.
registrerà la conferenza.
Ah, so there is an Italian voice saying that it's recording. I
Yeah.
think. So my talk is about complex systems and evasion of tipping, basically. So I understand quite a few of you work on the AMOC. I don't know a lot about the AMOC, but I know it's a complex system, and I know it's spatial. So maybe we can connect there. So I will be talking especially about spatial pattern formation. And first, I will explain the phenomenon of Turing before tipping. I will go into that the next couple of slides. Then I will talk about evasion of tipping, and I will also share some observations that I have about AMOC, which are sort of outside observations looking inside, something like that. Because I don't know much about the AMOC, but I've read some things about it, and then I will end with research outlook. I'm now working on ERC synergy grants. I will give you a couple of slides about that work. So Turing before tipping first. So these are I can say the sort of archetypal Turing patterns in ecosystems that are demonstrated here on this slide. What you see here at the upper panel is observations from dry savannas, like the transition between dry savanna and desert, basically. All those pictures come from Africa, from the Sahelian zone in Africa. And the pictures below are model simulations. So you see we are quite able to reproduce these patterns with our simple spatial models. So we think that, and we can also, of course, change parameters and then see if the parameters match the environmental conditions for which we see these patterns, and so on. So we think that we understand those Turing patterns in those ecosystems quite well, I can say. For example, we can make a very simple spatial model consisting of plants, surface water, and soil water, and include spatial scale in it by making it spatial explicit and modeling the flow of surface water and soil water and the dispersal of plants by a diffusion mechanism, which is a crude approximation, I know, but still it works. So the equations would look like this, in which the upper one is the overland flow, the middle one is the soil water, and the lower one is the plants. And what basically the main mechanism is in those models, reproducing these Turing patterns, is what I call a bathtub effect. So basically, the first thing is there is not enough water for a full, complete vegetation cover. But there is enough water for some cover to occur in these ecosystems. And the point here is that where there is vegetation cover, the infiltration rate is much higher, really much higher, than at places where there is no cover. And because of that, and that is because water infiltration of water that falls into the ground as rainwater infiltrates much faster because of the root penetration of the soil and the buildup of organic matter and those kind of things. So this results in a short range facilitation. So it means that you are happy with a neighbor plant because the neighbor plant increases the water infiltration for you, and you are happy because you need the water for your growth. But at the same time, between the patches, there is competition for the water between the patches because there is a net flow of water towards the patches. And this is what we call, so at a longer range, you have a negative feedback. So at a broader scale, you have competition. And those interactions lead to what we call scale-dependent feedback. And with that, we can explain these pattern formations. And the interesting result, or one interesting model result from this, is that this pattern formation precedes what we call a tipping point. So the idea here is that before reaching a tipping point, you see a sequence of patterns occurring that suggests that you are approaching a tipping point. And actually, after we worked on this, we could observe many Turing patterns in many ecosystems that are considered tipping prone. So we thought like these ecosystems were prone to tipping. So we are talking about peatlands, we are talking about arid ecosystems, we are talking about mussel beds, we are talking about coral reefs, we are talking about some boreal forest, we are talking about tidal flats. But when you look at them, it looks like they have Turing patterns. And actually this is because these ecosystems obey all scale-dependent feedback. And that can be basically explained by the general activator-inhibitor mechanism that Turing discovered when in 1952, when he was working on morphogenesis and pattern formation. And actually he predicted a chemical reaction in which you could generate patterns, stable patterns, as a consequence of diffusion. And that was of course a revolution, because diffusion per definition works against patterning. But he showed possibilities of stable patterning because of that. And it was only in the 90s, so that was 40 years later, in which they really could reproduce those patterns with chemical reactions in the lab. And now we are finding them a lot in ecosystems. So again, how that works in the dry systems, the scale-dependent feedback is because of overland flow and the differences in infiltration rate. So you get a short-range positive feedback and a longer-range negative feedback, as is indicated in the sketch below. And in all those systems that are demonstrated here, there is some kind of scale-dependent feedback. And instead of an activator-inhibitor mechanism, it's a little bit different. But the principle is the same, in that you have short-range activation, because there's interactions between a community and a resource or a stress factor. So there is a resource increase or a stress decrease because of that living community. And at the same time, further away, there is a resource decrease and a stress increase. And these interactions in a spatial context can explain these spatial patterns. So this led us quite some time ago to this general idea, so to say, this general idea of Turing before tipping. So at that time we thought we had actually found a first early warning indicator for a large-scale tipping in those systems. Okay, so this about Turing before tipping. But then I started to collaborate with some mathematicians, and this is where the chapter Evasion of tipping starts, and where things become even more interesting, I think. And that is, we took a kind of a simplified model as compared to that we started with in this presentation, but a more complex model as compared to the model of Chris Klausmeier, that Chris Klausmeier published in 2001, I think, or even 1999, I don't know anymore, I think 1999. So we extended that a bit, or we simplified our model a bit in these two equations, in which you have one water equation and one plant equation, and in which you have diffusion and advection when you have a shallow slope. And this is interesting because we could analyze this system in a mathematical fashion that we could not do before, actually, with the collaboration of Arjen Doelman and his people. Arjen Doelman is a mathematician from Leiden University that I work with already for a long time. And actually, what we discovered here is that these Turing patterns they indeed arise before what we call a tipping point, but instead of the tipping, we did not find tipping anymore because of this analysis, but we found the Busse balloon. And the Busse balloon, I think I have a picture of him, yes, here. This is Mr. Busse with his balloon. He was a guy, or he is a guy, he's still alive, but he is retired, working on fluid dynamics, and he found a Busse balloon in fluid dynamics, the convection cell, so to say. We find the same in these systems, in that these patterns that we found are very sticky. So they stick around even beyond the tipping point, so to say. So they stick around in a spatial context beyond the tipping point that you would find if you would not consider space. So that is basically the way I should explain this. So these patterns, they seem or they are stable, meaning even if you change the conditions towards beyond the tipping point, for example, towards a drier environment beyond the tipping point in a non-spatial context, you still see surviving patterns, and you still see that the pattern doesn't change. And at the same time, what the Busse balloon says that so first of all, you have a change in condition and you have the same pattern. The second observation in the Busse balloon is that there are many stable patterns possible. So with the same condition, there's a lot of possibilities of stable spatial patterns to occur, and you don't know beforehand actually what kind of stable pattern you might expect, because there is a whole range of possibilities that are potentially stable. And I think this is starting to connect with complex systems in general, including the AMOC. But I will talk about that a little bit more later. So we have here, instead of the classical tipping, with one tipping point and a hysteresis loop, etc., as you can see in the upper panel, we have a different situation in this model, right? I'm still talking about this simple toy model that we are analyzing, but here we find pattern adaptation, and we find a narrowing of the hysteresis loop, and we find smooth transition and smooth recoveries, right? Because of these pattern formation, which actually changed our mind. Well, what actually changed my mind about tipping point was this paper that I show you now. First authored by one of our PhD students that I shared with Arjen Doelman. And we needed to team up with quite some mathematicians, ecologists, and remote sensing data specialists to actually validate this idea of the Busse balloon. And this is what we did in this paper. And I can best summarize the results with this picture, I think. Because what we found in this paper is we looked at those spatial patterns in specific areas in Somalia. And what you see there is that given the same condition, so for example here, you would expect that a rainfall on all these sites is more or less equal, because this is square kilometers, right, where we're talking about here. So you don't expect a large difference in rainfall within this terrain, so to say. So given the same amount of rainfall, you have a whole range of different spatial patterns that coexist next to each other. And at the same time, what we observed is that these patterns, these vegetation patterns, they remained stable for decades. So there was changing rainfall conditions all the time, but the patterns, they basically didn't change. What does change in this kind of systems is that the vegetation bands, they slowly move upslope, but the wavelengths of the patterns and the size of the patterns, so to say, they don't change. So this actually validated our idea of the Busse balloon. And actually we sent this picture to Mr. Busse, and he was very enthusiastic, and he recognized also his Busse balloon in this picture. So we think this is a Busse balloon in a real ecosystem. So, but besides the Busse balloon, and this is also where it connects to the AMOC, I will explain later, is that you can see a whole range of wide parameter space still that is kind of empty. But we think that if you look at these bistable systems, as you may call them, that there is a whole range of possibilities or mechanisms in which you can expect those bistable states or multiple stable states, if you wish, to co-occur together in one spatial domain. So that means those stable states could occur in one spatial domain separated by boundaries between those states. And so we think that there's a whole, so this Booster balloon has a limited parameter range, right? But we think that all the parameter space outside the Booster balloon can also be filled, if you wish, with all kinds of spatial patterns. And those patterns could be generated because of a lot of mechanisms. I listed some of them, like local disturbance, spatial heterogeneity, noise, boundary dynamics, phase separation. And well, we can expand, I think, the number of mechanisms that could lead to these kind of spatial patterns. And if those spatial patterns, those coexistent patterns, so to say, are forced beyond this Turing bifurcation, they could even change into coexistence patterns in which one of those states have a Turing bifurcation or a Turing pattern. This is actually what we can also observe in real systems. And for example, well, I've done some Google Earth observations in Australia in which you can see these coexistence patterns in which one of those states are basically a Turing pattern. And to connect with main Earth system components, I came across this this nice picture of Karsten Egevang, which is an artist, a photographer, and this is actually an ice shelf coexistence with water, and you can see the ice shelf. I don't actually know what the mechanism behind this kind of pattern formation is, but I just found it a nice picture, to be honest. So we published this together with Mara, by the way, as you can see from the author list, in Science as a kind of like sketching out pathways of evasion of tipping in spatial complex systems. And this is how this came about. So moving towards, so what I'm talking about here is ecosystems, right? But I think these ideas of a Booster balloon and coexistence states and evasion of tippings and multi-stability. I think multi-stability is one of the key things that come to mind. Also, if I think about other Earth system components other than ecosystems, so to say. So, for example, if you talk about coexistence states, this is not specific for ecosystems. So again, Robin published a paper. So this Robin is really this is one of the younger persons that really changed or tipped my mind, if you wish, right? So besides ecosystems, you can also find coexistence states if you look at simple models in the energy balance, atmospheric circulation, shallow lakes, and then we come also to the ocean circulation. So there's also coexistence states in there when you look at such systems spatially, right? So as soon as you start to add spatial heterogeneity, or as you start like a higher spatial resolution, this tipping systems start to change into multi-stability and more gradual transitions with coexistence states. So now I will share you some AMOC observations. So I started to look into this a little bit further, not so much as you guys are doing, but I did some observations. So I would like to share them with you, and I would like to know your opinion about that. So there was this model comparison in 2015 by Drijfhout, and that is, as far as I know, the most recent intermodal comparison, and they're working now for another comparison, as I understand, right? So, but this was the one that is most recent, and in which they analyzed 37 complex Earth system models and 3 scenarios run until 2100, right? And then, well, as far as I know, if you look at AMOC collapse, that was only found in one model for all 3 scenarios. So what you see is often in the literature is that this paper is actually put forward as evidence for tipping. But I look at it a little bit different, because this is only found in one model for 3 scenarios out of 37 models, right? Okay, not all 37 models include the ocean and stuff like that, but I see it more as a kind of a Bayesian framework, in that there's only one model in which you see the AMOC collapsing, basically. But then there was this recent paper of René van Westen. I am sure that you read it in, I think it was Science Advances. And they also found tipping in a complex Earth system model for one scenario, right? And I want to emphasize that, for one scenario. And the scenario was unrealistic. I can say that because it's in their paper too, that it's unrealistic, right? So I think the freshwater amount in which they forced this model is about 80 times the realistic amount. But I think this is a very elegant and interesting paper, because they also found a physical-based early warning signal that also occur in conceptual models, and they confirmed this, actually, this physics-based early warning signal from conceptual models. They confirmed this in this model run in which they could force tipping, right? Well, I say that this is tipping, but I'm not so sure if it would basically conform the tipping framework, but I can follow their argumentation. But an interesting phenomena is also in this paper is that there is no control run, right? So they claim an early warning signal for tipping in their complex Earth system model, but they did not do a run with no tipping, which means this same early warning signal could occur also if there is no tipping, right? In which case it would be no early warning signal anymore. Actually, in this kind of literature, you see this a lot. So there is an experiment with no control. So I told them, please do a control, and they're working on that. But then the scary thing and the most interesting thing in this paper is that they found the same early warning signal in the data. So they concluded that the AMOC is on tipping course because of that. Right? So this is my observation about this Van Westen paper et al., and I'm happy to discuss this further after this presentation. And then what you see a lot in this literature is that there are so-called statistical early warning signals observed for AMOC collapse, found in data, concluding quite bluntly the same. Not only concluding bluntly that AMOC is on tipping course, but even concluding when the tipping will occur. And then I say beware, see next slide. And I show you this slide because these statistical early warning signals that are found in the data, also in the AMOC data, they have no causal relation with tipping whatsoever. So I can show you in this that in this simple graphs. So the upper simulation is a simulation in a model, in an AMOC model, in a simple AMOC model, right? The AMOC model comes from Lux et al. 2022. So you see a time series with increasing freshwater flux over time. And the upper panels, there's a tipping point approaching. And indeed, you see the statistical early warning signals as traditionally analyzed, like autocorrelation variance and restoring rates. But it took us, or it was not me, it took Els Wijnands one evening to reproduce the same statistical early warning signals in the same model, but with a parameter combination that you do not have tipping points. Right, so this claim of statistical early warning signals, and then as a consequence of that, claiming that tipping is approaching and even predicting a tipping moment, is, to my opinion, way out of control. So I would like, so we can discuss that, of course, when after my presentation. What time is it actually? Am I still in time?
You had about 30 minutes and it's now 28, but...
Shall I show you a couple of slides about my ERC synergy project?
Please, yeah.
I can do that quickly. Sure. I can do that quickly, right?
Please, yeah.
So in the ERC synergy project, we look actually at tipping evasion, or spatial patterning and tipping in two major ecosystems. And it is savanna and tundra, and this is because savanna is very important because of the livelihood of 2 billion people, and the tundra is very important because of this potential climate feedback, in which shrubification would lead to a change in albedo, which would lead to even more warming. So we are looking at savannas and tundras, and the main question with these systems is that they are tipping prone, at least that's what the literature says. The tipping being a change from tundra to savanna, or a change from savanna to desert. And our question is, can we evade and even reverse the tipping of ecosystems? So that's why we study pathways of resilience, and we study that across multiple levels of organization, meaning plant, population, community. And we try to connect that with ways to intervene in these systems, to increase resilience. And we think that key to these to answering these questions is spatial pattern formation, because the spatial pattern formation apparently can lead to resilience and can also connect with specific spatial interventions. And the people that do those spatial interventions, they know that already for ages. So our theory lags a little bit behind, I think, but anyway, it's interesting. So what I find especially interesting is if you think about those coexistence states, then there is boundaries between those states, and they are almost per definition unstable. So meaning almost always, but not often. No, not, I say almost always, but that's not true. There is many conditions in which those boundaries can be stable, but there is also many conditions for which those boundaries can be unstable. And one of those things that could occur is basically what they call fingering. So if such a boundary can become unstable and basically reproduce patterns, or produce patterns that very much look like Turing patterns, but are not Turing patterns. And actually this is a mechanism that could spontaneously reverse tipping in a spatial context. So that is, I think, very interesting. And what I also think is interesting about these boundary dynamics is that you can do something with those boundaries, right? So you can actually manipulate boundaries by influencing them by grazing or putting them on fire. So you can actually think of novel focal points for human intervention in those ecosystems. So what we try to do in this new project is actually connect new theory. So actually expanding the tipping theory and working on new models, new spatial explicit models, and connecting them to new data and existing data to develop a new theory for basically complex spatial systems. So I come to my last slide, concluding that the concept of tipping is too simplistic for spatial systems. And then the next one is very obvious, because all systems are spatial. So we think we need new concepts, such as spatial pattern formation. And spatial pattern formation leads to multi-stability and large-scale resilience, at least what I showed you today, because there is still another angle to add to that, but I will not go into that. So we need to go beyond simplicity and embrace spatial complexity. And with that, I have finished my presentation. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Max.
You're welcome.